Now, if you need any more proof that Anthony Albanese's voice will be a legal dog's breakfast, you only have to look at the divide that's growing within the legal fraternity over backing or opposing the voice. We know the New South Wales Bar Council was quick to back the proposal, and now the Victorian counterpart is torn over whether or not to take a position. Some barristers are demanding the council support the referendum, while others say, look, we've got to remain impartial. But the harsh truth is, for a large number of barristers, there's a bit of a vested interest in all of this, publicly supporting a voice, not just out of virtue, but also by the work that will likely come their way if the voice becomes a constitutional reality. Joining me now to discuss this, eminent lawyer Stuart Wood, KC. Stuart Wood, thank you for your time. You have broken cover. You've spoken out about some of the ulterior motives you say that your colleagues have here. We're talking about financial motivation for barristers to back the voice, aren't we?
Yeah, there's obviously a problem. I'm not here to criticise any individual barrister, but in terms of the Bar Council is supposed to represent every barrister. It's supposed to make sure that it stands between government and the citizen, between the state and individuals. And in that role, as standing up to government, it shouldn't be used as a plaything for people who want to advocate some controversial political purpose. And I think that's a reasonable point. It's a trade union for the members of the bar, and it should act in the interests of those members as a whole. And when it speaks out, it should speak out on things that are within its remit. That is, speak out on questions involving the administration of justice or the rule of law. And there's a big problem when the Bar Council enters into the political arena, because when it does so, it risks damaging and degrading its institutional capacity to speak, and when I mean to speak, to criticise government on things that actually matter to the rule of law and the administration of justice. You know, waiting lists in courts, extra money for legal aid, and protection of the jury system. These sort of things, which are unpopular with government, but once you become a cheerleader for a political cause, then your ability to speak out on unpopular causes is diminished, and they shouldn't be entering into that field.
So let's talk about the amount of work, I guess, that governments control for barristers. Somewhere between 40 and 50% of the legal spend comes through government of one type or another. Is there any concern that any barrister who perhaps dares to oppose the voice, or a bar council like Victoria that they will take a neutral position, that they might be penalised if the voice gets up?
Well, people don't appreciate that, at least in Victoria, and I suspect the same applies more or less around Australia, but I can speak from experience in Victoria. Most of the litigation concerns government and the citizen. Maybe more than 50%, maybe 60%. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars spent by the state and federal governments in the courts in Victoria. Now, that is a very attractive opportunity for barristers who want to be in court, which all barristers do. And that opportunity, that incentive that opportunity to capture that work will be improved if one signals that one is on board with the government's objectives. And the state and federal government couldn't be speaking more loudly about their approach to the voice, how they believe that it is something that must happen. And so if you're a sensible person making decisions about wanting to get onto the gravy train of government work, you're not going to put sand in the gears. You're going to tend to do the sort of things that make you more attractive to the biggest client in town. Now Jack Lang used to say this, in the race of life, back self-interest because you know it's trying. And when assessing what is going on, people have to understand that there is a big incentive here in Victoria for barristers to be seen to be pursuing or supporting the biggest client's agenda. Now, I'm not saying that any individual is motivated solely by that reason, simply that when you come to assess the motivations of people, don't overlook the lawyers' avarice. I mean, people have talked for centuries about lawyers' love for money, and that shouldn't be overlooked in this debate. And a lot of people don't quite understand that the government plays an overbearing role in the opportunity for legal work in this state.
And that's why, Stuart Wood, we're seeing some of the strongest voices against the voice coming from retired judges, former High Court judges in the case of Terence Cole today, former judge of the New South Wales Appeals Court, of course, the man who led the Cole Royal Commission. He put a submission into the Joint Parliamentary Committee that's looking at the legislation, and in it he wrote, the voice is critical to the objectives of the Uluru Statement that Aboriginals wish to establish sovereignty over Australian territory, land and water. And then he goes on to say that the Indigenous community also want to establish monetary and other compensation, truth-telling we know, to achieve objectives, to achieve these objectives, he says, it's necessary to split the Australian people permanently into two groups based solely on race, which he says is wrong in principle. Now, what's your take on those comments from Terry Cole?
Well, I think the key word there is permanent. There's no question the Commonwealth Parliament has the power and has had the power since the 1960 referendum to do what it likes in relation to Aboriginal affairs. It can pass laws in favour of Aboriginals, it can pass laws that impact negatively on them, it can do what it likes. So the key phrase in former Commissioner Cole's statement is permanent. Why should something be entrenched permanently? Why shouldn't the Parliament have the opportunity every generation to revisit the way in which it deals with First Nations people? I mean, it doesn't make any sense to labour or to require any future generation to be saddled with whatever the current zeitgeist is in relation to policies concerning Aboriginal affairs. They should change over time as the composition of the Australian electorate changes and is reflected in the composition of the Parliament. And that's what's happened over the last 50 years. The policies towards Aboriginals have changed, and the Parliament should be free to do that, to take whatever steps it needs to take without, and then be held responsible to it by the electors, without some supervening High Court telling the Parliament what it can or can't do because there's a constitutionally entrenched voice. It just doesn't make any sense when the Commonwealth has the power already to do whatever it wants.
A lot of common sense there, Stuart Wood. We don't hear it enough. Thank you for your time.